Thank you all so much for joining today's session, Local Infrastructure Hub. We know folks are getting connected and coming out of the waiting room and settling in. So while you're doing that, if you can please add your name, your role, your city to the chat, it always helps it to be a more interactive session if we know who's in the room. And just want to say a big welcome to everyone who's joining us for the first time, and for those of you who are frequent visitors to the Local Infrastructure Hub. We'll get started just in a minute when everyone's audio is connected. Thanks, Monica, for kicking us off in the chat. Arizona's coming in strong so far. Some southwestern representation. Sarah, thanks for helping us on the East Coast. Great. So we'll get started. Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us today. If you haven't yet, please put your name, your role, and your city in the chat. My name is Jamie Lavin, and I lead the Local Infrastructure Hub on behalf of Bloomberg Philanthropies. And today's session is brought to you by our fantastic partners at the United States Conference of Mayors and Results for America. So today's session is really meant to be a deep dive into the Safe Streets and Roads for All grant program. We are building on the introductory webinar we had last month, where we brought USDOT on to talk about their priorities with this program and how they'll be thinking about and reviewing applications. And we also brought in city experts who won Safe Streets and Roads for All grants, whether that was for planning, for demonstration, or for implementation, to talk about their projects, what the process of applying was like, and what implementation has looked like so far. So today is really meant to help those cities who are looking to apply by late June with the technical aspects of crafting a competitive grant application. The Safe Streets and Roads for All program is a critical opportunity for local governments to secure funding that can save lives, reduce traffic injuries, and build safer transportation systems in our communities. We're thrilled to have transportation, data, and grant writing experts with us today to provide best practices and to help make us all smarter on how to build a competitive application. Our expert speakers are going to walk through key strategies and tools that can help identify local projects that align with federal funding priorities, build a comprehensive and credible project budget, use data effectively to draft a compelling narrative, and demonstrate your project's potential impact using the right metrics. With that, we're going to get started. I'm pleased to welcome our first speaker, Robin Hutchinson, who is a principal at Hutchinson Advisory and a former administrator at the U.S. Department of Transportation, who helped craft the Safe Streets and Roads for All program. She's going to provide a deep dive into the grant. So I want to thank you so much, Robin, for helping us all get smarter on safe streets, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Jamie, and thanks to all of the partners who have made the Local Infrastructure Hub possible. I'm really happy to be here with so many cities today. I always feel very at home. I have been in your shoes in a few different cities, and it's what really helped me think through, along with so many really dedicated folks at the USDOT, why we needed a program like Safe Streets for All. I'm going to take a pretty short amount of time and walk through the basics of this year's NOFO. One thing I'll say off the top, I'm very pleased to see so much of the original intent, purpose, and application all intact from year to year. The purpose of this grant is to get resources to you for your local communities, because you know what you need. And it's to apply these resources to reduce, eventually eliminate death and serious injury on your streets. All of those goals are really reflected well in this NOFO. And there are some changes, but let's first look at just the basics here. This is as expected. It should be about $1 billion a year. It's a roughly $5 billion program. It's split unevenly between planning and implementation. So for planning funds, we see, roughly about 40% of the funds, and for implementation, we see roughly 60% of the funds. It's a lot of money for planning. I'm going to talk about how you slot into planning, supplemental planning, or demonstration in a little bit, but your odds are pretty good in planning. It is much more competitive in implementation, and so your narrative should be very, very compelling. Some of the funding amounts have changed. Just for example, in planning, the maximum used to be $10 million. It's down to $5 million. We saw very few planning grants that were in excess of $5 million. So I don't think that we collectively are going to see a big impact by this. It should be roughly the same amount of awards that we've seen in past years. This is pretty good news for the program. You can go to the next slide, please. Deadlines are hard. I would highly recommend you apply before the deadline. It's not unusual to have a glitchy system. It causes a lot of stress. Do it the day before or 2 days before. Your technical questions are due very soon. And there were some DOT webinars. You can watch them. And I've provided this link here. You can see there were 3 different webinars. I'm told that they were very informative. And let's just pause. Oh, can you go back for a sec? Let's just pause there so that everybody gets that website. And now you can go to the next slide. Thank you. There are some changes that I want to review, and I want to make a few recommendations once we go through some of the changes. The way underserved communities is defined has changed from previous years. So the kind of data that you pull to show that you are serving your underserved communities will be a little bit different and will be based on, we used to use this years ago, areas of persistent poverty. So if you haven't started to pull that data for yourselves, now is the time. I mentioned the amount has decreased. There are minimally updated requirements for action plans, supplemental planning, and demonstration grants. Read this section carefully if you plan to apply, especially for demonstration. There's some detail that you will need to provide. If you are referring to other plans, just 3 is all. You can tie your efforts to 3 other plans, but no more. I think that's sufficient. There are some minimally updated requirements for implementation grants. I'm going to go through those, and same for action plans. If you want to dig deeper, we show you the page numbers where you can read more about the exact changes, and I'll try and walk through some of them here as well. And you can go to the next slide. In my scrub of the NOFO, I found some things that I thought were important to pull out for all of you that were not necessarily identified in the changes. So in the section in the NOFO where it says, here's how it's changed from the last NOFO, these were not included. These are just things that I think are important for you to know. So first, the term public health has been struck from the NOFO. So if you were planning on leaning into the public health aspect of roadway safety, you might want to be a bit quieter on that. Even if you believe it is something you want to do, you don't necessarily need to highlight it in your grant application. There is additional language and clarification on using the plan of a higher jurisdiction. And what does that mean? It means if you're a city and you're part of a metropolitan planning organization, and that NPO has an adopted action plan, you are free to use that action plan as your own, so long as you're geographically represented in that plan. So I've talked with many small communities where this is actually working out quite well. They have a higher jurisdiction that has an adopted action plan. They can now move into either supplemental planning or implementation as they wish. These next 2 I want you to pay very close attention to as you're building your applications. There's language in there that says, and it's quoted here, whether the applicant included infrastructure reducing lane capacity for vehicles or reducing access for emergency vehicles, delivery vehicles, and vehicles serving the disabled, these applications would be viewed less favorably for the department. Okay, good news, it's not prohibited. Less good news, we're going to talk about how to be creative with that in just a moment. And then lastly, it refers to, it's in a supplemental Consideration section, it refers to the principles outlined in the recent DOT order, ensuring reliance upon sound economic analysis in DOT's policies. And many of you have probably seen this before. This one generated a lot of questions about what does marriage and birth rates mean? What are some of the changes in the other criteria? Reread that. What this little statement means is that they can actually evaluate based on these principles that were outlined in this order. And I'll make some recommendations on how to weave those in. And you can go to the next slide. Okay, recommendations. Read the NOFO and then kind of read it again. You'll probably find things that I didn't even find in my scrub, and it will help you really tailor your application. If you're a smaller city, try and tie to an action plan that's already been adopted. There's been several years of awards already. You may already have an action plan you can use, which allows you to be more specific in what you're applying for. 3, if you can, fit your work into action planning, supplemental planning, or demonstration, you should try to. There will be far more competition for implementation funds. 4, there are certain realities outlined in this NOFO, such as what you're doing to travel lanes and if it might impede other movement. I really want to encourage you all to remember that that is not state of the practice, that you get to work at state of the practice, and don't put that away so quickly. Find a way to apply for what you need to do and consider what you consider to be state of the practice for your city. And that goes for some of the climate considerations as well. You are not going to be emphasizing climate in your applications, but that does not mean that you set it aside. It is still state of the practice. Same goes for how we talk about equity. Micromobility is pretty de-emphasized here, so if you were planning on emphasizing that, you might want to be a bit quieter on it. Proposals emphasizing technology will be favorably viewed. I'm pretty confident about this. The Secretary has been quoted many times talking about accelerating the deployment of technology for roadway safety. That's a win for everyone. Proposals emphasizing the safety of children, including access to schools, will very likely be favorably reviewed. This is another priority for the Secretary, and I think that's why we saw some language about marriage and birth rates, emphasizing the safety of children, another win all the way around. And then proposals within areas of persistent poverty that also have high birth rates and marriage rates will likely be favorably viewed. That's sort of a kind of hit a lot of things all at once, and I think there probably will be census tracts that do show all of this, so go for that. I probably was too ambitious with my slides, so let's go to the next slide. I may skip a few. I'm going to hold off on the criteria right now. I want to make sure we have enough time for all of our speakers, and you can go to the next one and the next one. I want to just hit a couple more recommendations for implementation proposals. I'll just say it again that sometimes I have seen in the past proposals for implementation that actually could have been a demonstration. So really look carefully. Is what you're proposing to do, is it construction? If it's truly construction, you're going to be in implementation, but if it's not, really consider if you can switch. For communities who are applying for an implementation grant and who are proposing street design changes, my recommendation is that, and I know I'm like speaking to people who really know this and who have really worked with this in their communities. We all know that it's rare that a lane reconfiguration affects capacity. It reorganizes the street, it improves safety, and it very often improves efficiency, and it very rarely has an effect on true capacity. If you are proposing lane reconfigurations that could be misconstrued, be sure to include the analysis that shows that capacity is unaffected, that your capacity is maintained through your corridor. I also want to say, as controversial as this might be, is the more proposals that include lane reconfiguration, the lower risk that you will be thrown out. But that will be all up to you and how you decide as a city to propose. And those are sort of 3 kind of add-on recommendations that are specific for implementation proposals. These slides will be available to you. I included the criteria from this year. I went through them quickly because I know Justin has a lot to share with you on data, and Emily on preparing your application. So I will stop there for now. And if you want more information, these slides will be available, and there's a little bit more information included.
Great. Thank you so much, Robin. Really, really helpful. I know I have a bunch of questions, so I'm excited for when we get into our Q&A period. But as you noted, Dustin is our data expert, and there's so much compelling data that we know is important to include in these applications. So I am going to pass the baton over to Justin Edwards, who's Data Director of the National League of Cities and has been leading the data sections of our technical assistance boot camps to talk about how a city can incorporate data and form a data story really in their applications. So over to you, Justin.
Thanks, Jamie. Thank you, Robin, also. So I kind of want to just set the table a little bit, and demystify what we mean really when we're saying data. The NOFO will tell you what you must include from a data perspective. So it's going to say, it's going to give you some guidance on you need to provide, your total count of vehicle-related fatalities or crashes. It's going to give you a sort of a full rundown. So I'm going to go back and re-emphasize Robin's recommendation to read the NOFO and reread the NOFO. One of the most important pieces that you're going to need to consult is the fatality analysis reporting system. It's from the Federal Highway Administration. This is basically a database where you're going to go in and search for some very specific filters to get those number of vehicle-related crashes, and then you're going to calculate your 5-year average annual fatality rate per 100,000 people. And that sounds like a mouthful, but we've kind of organized these slides here to kind of show you just how to navigate that process within the FARS data query. Here, I've just kind of highlighted exactly sort of the toggles that you're going to need to do, and make sure that you leave if you're looking for your particular city, all the way down to that section number 4, how you're going to set up your state, leave your county blank, look at your town and village. And what it's going to do is it's going to generate a table and look at the 5 most recent years of data. You just want to make sure in section 3 there that the range of years is exactly what's being requested in the NOFO itself. I believe it's 2018 to 2022 for this particular application cycle. It's going to spit out a table. It's going to show you, by month, how many individuals were killed in a motor vehicle related accident, and then by year. If we go to the next slide, I've tried to just kind of spell out here exactly how to use the formula. There's a link below that links to the Department of Transportation's info sheet on how to calculate this 5-year average annual fatality rate. Essentially, you'll just add up the number of fatalities over that 5-year, you'll divide that by 5, and then you'll divide that by the total population and multiply it by 100,000. So in this example, the 5-year average annual fatality rate would be 11.47. There may be some information on saying, suggesting that a certain threshold will be more competitive or not. Don't stop there. Don't worry about that. There are other ways that you might be able to demonstrate, excessive safety concerns as well. But this is one that I think you really need to familiarize yourself with this process on how to get this information. Go to the next slide. As Robin mentioned, at the end of January in 2025, DOT issued a memo and kind of started hinting and suggesting at, preferring areas that have higher birth rates or higher marriage rates. This might, have thrown a few people off. And there's a link on the slides, I believe, to the FARS data query as well. I think there was a question in the chat. I've linked here the source for the 2022 national average birth rate and then the 2022 national average marriage rate. You can find those, simple Google search, look for those by term and add census. There's a link here to the full memo as well. If we go to the next slide, calculating marital rate. The census collects data, at various geographic resolutions. The lowest level, meaning, state, county, city, is going to come down to the congressional district. So I encourage you to just look up your congressional district for your community, for your city, town. I've linked here also the table. It's B12501, and that looks at marriages over the last year. Census has a myriad number of tables that you can get data sliced all sorts of different ways. This is the most clear-cut way to cite this. You want to go in basically and look at, on the left column there, you'll see that the total female population within that congressional district is 296,914. And then the total number of marriages in the last year were 4,119. So there's an example of how you'd use that formula to say, for this particular community, the marital rate in this year, I think in this example, I'm looking at 2023 data, would be 13.87. So you're going to be able to quickly grab this if you just kind of go back and just memorize this formula. It's pretty straightforward. It's good to have on hand, especially if in fact the areas in which you're looking to develop a project do in fact have a high marital rate, or I would also suggest if they're connecting neighborhoods with higher marital rates. And so if your project is going to be actually passing through communities that may not, but is connecting other communities that do, it's worthwhile to take a look at some of those surrounding peripheral communities that may be affected by your project as well. If we go to the next slide, we've also just kind of helped you figure out this for the birth rate as well. This is published in the fertility tables by the census. It's S1301. And this is essentially looking at the number of women aged 15 to 50, and it has it all the way down to the census tract level, who gave birth in the past year divided by the total population of women aged 15 to 50, and then multiply that by 1,000 again. Julie, that is the way the census publishes it, and so that is why we've gone ahead and done it the way that the census does it. You're very keen to note that we're just essentially trying to match the way the census is publishing it and not making, any sort of editorial sort of addition or subtraction on it. Just sort of trying to translate exactly what they've got. And then I also want to encourage you, those are sort of some of the musts that you have. There are a myriad number of data platforms out there. Some have kind of been removed and, and are disused anymore in this current sort of application, sort of climate. However, the census does have some great table builders. You can do some really quick summary data grabs for your community at large, looking at sort of employment conditions, living arrangements, looking at multi-unit housing, where you can actually start to build in some statistics that can really kind of strengthen your community narrative. So what is the population impacted? Where can I find, schools? Where can I find evidence that there's a high number of children in this particular community? If you Google data.census.gov, there's a lot of different examples, sort of recorded tutorials, as well as just some off-the-shelf interactive maps where you can start pulling some data in to kind of give you a little bit of a statistical kind of solid foundation to back up your story and your narrative as well. I think I'm going to pause there to make sure that I see there's a lot of questions in the chat here as well.
Maybe I think what we might do is we're going to pause on the questions for answering the questions. Why don't we get through Emily's presentation, and then just in case any of our presenters are going to answer the questions that are coming up, why don't we pause and we will come back to those. Does that sound good, Justin?
Yep.
Okay, great. So next up, we're going to have Emily Winburn, who has again been helping us in our grant assistance, boot camps for cities to really figure out how do you pull this all together into a compelling grant narrative. So Emily's going to share with us what are some of those grant winning strategies on both pulling into a narrative and a comprehensive budget that's going to help convince the DOT that you are shovel ready. So over to you, Emily.
Thank you, Jamie, and Robin and Justin, of course. So I want to just start with a little bit of questions for you to think of as you start your writing process, which you might have already identified some of these. So your team and your organization on who's actually going to be part of your writing team is really important. You may only have one person available to write. I know that capacity can be tight, especially if you're writing in-house. So it's important to have a full team available, even if someone doesn't have lots of experience with grant writing particularly. They can help you with the review process. You want to make sure that you have someone outside of the writing process to review and just make sure that your narrative makes sense from someone's perspective who is unfamiliar with your project, because the people who are reviewing your grant are not going to be familiar with your project. So that'll kind of help you make sure you're explaining everything well. If we could go to the next slide. Robin touched on these, but I'm just going to spend just a couple of minutes talking about the selection criteria and the requirements for the narrative. So for planning particularly, you have 3 selection criteria. Those are safety impact, underserved communities, and additional safety context. So that's how you're going to organize your narrative. With planning, you only have 2 pages. So this is just if you're requesting funding for a Safe Roads action plan, or however, Vision Zero action plan. So the narrative is pretty simple here, and I suggest that you just follow this kind of 3-section outline, and you should be successful with that. So you're going to set it up literally in 3 sections, with your first section identifying your safety impact, then your underserved communities, and then additional safety context. It's helpful to include mention of like meaningful engagement with your public, especially if you've had engagement with the underserved communities, different community organizations, and other stakeholders. And I think that's everything on that slide. If we could go to the next one. So then with implementation, these are your first 2 selection criteria. There's 4 total for implementation. You have safety need, safety impact, and so these are your 2 first ones. Again, for implementation, you're gonna set it up the same way. You're gonna focus on your selection criteria to be able to kind of address all those points. And if we could go to the next slide. The other 2 selection criteria for implementation specifically is engagement and collaboration, and then supplemental planning and demonstration activities if you have those. So again, you're going to focus on these. I won't read every part of the selection criteria, but these are all listed in the NOFO, and you will literally format your narrative in the sections based on your selection criteria. If we could go to the next slide. So some of the things to keep in mind, which Robin kind of highlighted some of these, to strengthen your narrative, you want to speak to the SS4A grant priorities. So of course you want to promote safety and prevent fatal and serious injuries. Low cost and high impact strategies are a really good way to appeal to this administration. And you do want to ensure equitable investment in underserved communities. Underserved communities are a part of the selection criteria. So you want to make sure to highlight those, specifically if you have entire census tracts that are considered underserved. Those are important areas to make sure that you emphasize. Innovative technologies, evidence-based ideas, engagement with your community, and above all, make sure that you're following the NOFA requirements. Even after you write, I suggest going back and reading the NOFA, making sure that you have all your items covered. And you're going to want to include why you're doing this. Make sure you don't lose sight of that as part of your application. Reviewers will read hundreds of applications, so it's important to make your community stand out and your project. If we could go to the next slide. This is just a list of the information that will be required of you to submit in Valid Eval, which is the application portal that DOT uses for this grant opportunity. And if we could go to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about the budget. So this is more of the key information that's required actually in the portal itself. So related to the budget, you want to make sure you're requesting enough funding, especially for the planning portion. Your minimum amount for planning is $100,000, and your match is 20% of your total project cost. Especially if you're applying for an action plan grant, you want to do a little bit of research about how much those consultant costs are in your area to make sure that you ask for enough funding to be able to get your action plan completed. And a reminder that your match is 20% of the total project cost. And so that can come from a variety of sources. You can use in-kind staff time. You can use cash from your budget or a partner organization if you have that. And then you'll also have to list as part of your required information any other federal funds that will be used towards this project. And if you have coordination with another organization that might be providing your match or working with you on the project, you'll need to make sure you coordinate with them to get a letter. I think that's all my big highlights. I'll pause there to make sure we have time for questions and everything.
Thank you so much, Emily. I think maybe we'll bring Justin and Robin onto the screen. We can do a little bit of a moderated panel if that works for everyone. So we got a lot of questions in the chat, and I'm going to exert a little bit of moderator's privilege and start with a question based on what we heard from DOT last month. And when they were talking about their priorities, one of the priorities that they said that they're going to be focused on is shovels in the ground, right? Like moving dirt. Is this a project that will see results in the short term? And how feasible is it? How maybe I'll maybe start with Robin here, and then go to Emily and Justin. How would you reflect that? And what are the ways that you think a city could be well positioned to show that they're prepared to execute if they were to win a grant?
I'd have two recommendations. First, if you're applying for an implementation grant, you're actually building something moving dirt and you will have a shovel in the ground. You should try to demonstrate that all of your pre-work is done. So do you have your right of way? Has your community already been engaged? Has it been through any sort of formal legislative process? Has your council agreed upon it? Do you have a final layout? Are you up to 30 or 60% design already? You should demonstrate all of those things that show readiness to construct. I think that will go a very long way. Second, I think it's worth keeping in mind that for roadway safety, there are interventions that don't take a dig, that are actually surface treatments. And you're so ready already for those. Like they just don't take that much. And I think you could, if you're applying for, let's say, a demonstration grant. I've talked to many communities who are sort of leaning in this direction because they know that they can create a plan, buy inexpensive materials, and deploy something low cost over a wide geographic area. Those are key words that are immediately implementable and measurable, with outcomes that would be immediately measurable as well. And I think if you're doing that, you could show your immediate action and your ability to collect immediate results. And that's another way to be ready. So really for both implementation, show all the ways you're ready to build, and for demonstration, show that you can move quickly for results.
Emily, Justin, anything to add?
I'll jump in and just say, if you can tell a long story with a picture, or any sort of like very, succinct evidence that the community's been engaged, or there has been, a design process that has been approved by council, that saves you space and creates opportunity to maybe lean in on other areas as well.
And Emily, maybe picking up on Justin's point there, we sometimes hear about, letters of support that folks submit along with their applications. How should a city think about sort of quantity over quality, and how to make sure that those letters of support are sort of just tailored to sway a reviewer?
Yeah, so letters of support are not technically required for this grant, but of course it's always a good thing to show that you have broad community support. I always recommend, if you have a good relationship with your state DOT, that's a good opportunity there. Any of the larger, like the next jurisdiction, like if you're in a city, your county, or your MPO, and then any specific advocacy groups that are really kind of working for safety, road safety. Those are all good folks to approach. And I also recommend giving them an already written letter where they can change things if they want to, but to make it as easy as possible for them to provide the support, and to make sure you change your letters of support by each group. You're making them tailored to each group you're asking.
Great. So some of our audience questions, thank you all, by the way, for diving into the chat and answering many of the questions that were in there. So we'll just take ones that haven't already been answered. Susan Gonzalez asked, do we have to use the time period 2018 to 2022, or can we use data that's more current? Justin?
I believe the NOFO expressly mentions 2018, 2022, but I would refer to that exactly what it says. That's what I recall seeing, 2018, 2022.
And then maybe we'll just put an underline under what Emily said, which is you must follow the NOFO, right?
Yes.
Like anytime you talk to anyone at DOT, whether this administration, previous administration, the biggest thing that they always say about applying is make sure that you've done everything the NOFO asks, and that you have every box checked. And so the easiest way to not get a project funded, especially a planning grant, which seems like is pretty easy to get funded, is to do something that's not in accordance with the NOFO. That's great.
I underscore that I have seen great proposals be not funded because of a technicality on something that was done incorrectly, and there's nothing you can do at that point except apply again. And but you can add to it, like if you do exactly what they asked for you, but you slip in a sentence saying, and we have additional data that shows blah blah blah, you're pretty safe as long as you've met the criteria to the letter.
Yeah, I mean, a great example would be where maybe 2023 is showing that there's been a significant uptick from what your 5-year average annual from 2018 to 2022. So that's sort of creating a bit of a sense of heightened urgency around getting funds in a project delivered.
That's great. I think the next question was from Katie. Which ACS estimate should we use for calculating the marriage rates and birth rates? the 1 year, the 5-year estimates? Should we use 2018 to 2022 5-year estimates since the NOFO is requiring that of FARS data, or the 2016 to 2020 5-year estimates since the NOFO is requiring we use 2020 census population data for the fatality rate?
Again, it's almost a fielder's choice, I guess. I use the 2023 5-year estimates because it is the most recent. I think once you familiarize yourself with navigating those census tables, go look through a couple different versions. If you see an interesting story emerging from the change in that, I think that's worthwhile noting, especially if it's particularly advantageous, meaning in this community where we're seeking funds to implement a project or deliver, a planning project, we are continuously seeing higher, more and more children being born. And you can cite that year over year using different data ranges. I would start with the 2023 5-year because it's the most contemporary view that we're going to have, unless otherwise stated in the NOFO. I didn't see any date range in the NOFO for this at all. In fact, it takes a lot of digging to figure out a bit, and we try to do a little bit of that background work for you on those two rate calculations.
And I'll just note what Robin said earlier. When DOT came on to our webinar last month, they really emphasized that they're going to be prioritizing projects that help families and are thinking about schools. And so we I think often reflect back on Mayor Aquanetta Warren from Fontana, California, who has joined other local infrastructure hub webinars. She received a RAISE grant that was all about access to school and how dangerous it was for the kids to get to school. So great points on thinking about those statistics, but what else can you be telling the story about? How else will the project impact families, potentially impact schools? And I think there's a bigger story maybe to tell there that also conforms with this administration's priorities. Okay, so and I think this hopefully that sort of answered the question, Sarah, that you asked. Are there resources that provide more guidance about what DOT is looking for in family-oriented transportation projects? Does anyone have anything to add beyond what we've sort of talked about with both the census rates, the DOT memo that we linked to earlier, and sort of this orienting around schools and families? Anything to add?
I would only add that we all have the same information now. If you've read the DOT memorandum, you know what's in that. If you've read the NOFO, you know what's in that. And now it's really taking and if you've listened to the secretary, you've heard him talk about his family of 9 children and the challenges experienced there. And like that's what pieces together a strategy for you. Like there isn't any sort of additional specific information on how to do it. So what is a challenge in your community that involves, the health and safety of children? And I think you could really like thread together what's unique in your community under this big umbrella that like families and children are important to this administration. It's actually this secretary.
Great. Thank you so much, Robin. The next question I had seen was, and Robin, you answered this in part, but I think it's still worth maybe crystallizing a little bit more because I've heard this from others. If you were awarded a planning grant in the past but are not ready to pursue an implementation grant, can we apply for another planning grant to focus on a different area? And I take that as like a different area of the city.
Your planning grant should cover your whole city. Hopefully it does. And then you're sort of free to drill down into a part of the city or a problem that you uncovered or something you want to try in supplemental or demonstration. And yes, you can apply. You're not ready to apply for implementation because you don't have, well, let me back up. The first thing, what city were we talking about? The first thing I want you to do is see if there's a higher jurisdiction that has adopted a roadway safety action plan that qualifies. If so, if your city is geographically included in that, you could probably apply for, whatever you want, because you now have an action plan that you can tie to. If that's not the case and you don't have a higher jurisdiction action plan that you can tie to, you can still apply for supplemental planning for, maybe there's a gap that you identify. Maybe during the development of the action plan, you identified a gap that needs additional attention or more outreach or a specific study, like a speed study, or a technology study. Like, you will discover things as you're developing an action plan, and you can come back and ask for supplemental planning. If you want to try something, let's say you're going through your action plan process and the community, this is just an example, has said, we want to feel safer crossing and we want you to try new things. Well, you could apply for a demonstration grant and pick a few locations, pick materials, tell the DOT the time frame, the materials you're going to use, how long it's going to be in place, how you're going to collect the data, and apply for a demonstration grant. So you have a lot of options, even if you're in process with your initial citywide action plan.
Great, thank you so much. The next question is from Rebecca Pinson. Should we include economic development data? Reading this in the DOT policies, how would you all approach it? And I think this comes back to how we try to show, multiple benefits of a project, for instance.
I would give it a mention, but not spend too much time on it because it is not anywhere in the criteria. But it's probably favorably viewed, and if you want to spend a sentence just beefing that up a bit, I don't think it could hurt you. Justin?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I'd say especially if you know and can demonstrate that this corridor in which you're trying to implement a project is a main artery, maybe of commerce, local commerce, or is a shipping route or something like that. Doesn't hurt. I don't think, as Robin said, because it's not in the criteria, it's not going to be the foundation of your argument.
And just like thinking through how you would tell it in a story, is it usually when there's an increase in economic development, there's also an increase in activity in your roadway, and it could be kind of like a base reason for why you want to do something. So I could see it being woven in pretty seamlessly.
Great.
But I wouldn't just a page or even a full paragraph.
Yeah. Okay. Cheryl Burns had asked, if we apply for a demonstration grant to implement temporary safety measures, what do we do with the temporary equipment after the demonstration period? Are we allowed to keep those things if we see positive results or redeploy them at other locations? Or
Yes,
what do we
yes.
do?
Yes and yes. No one's going to come take your materials. That's not going to happen. Yes, you just started a program now where you can use them again. So yeah, I think they're yours.
And as somebody who believes in reuse, I will say that if your community doesn't have a reuse scenario, lend them to your neighbor, right? If they wanted to try to demonstrate efficacy of a project. Okay, the next question, unanswered questions, I say. You guys are doing a great job in the chat. Okay, I think this sort of builds on a topic we were just discussing. Can we apply for demonstration or supplemental planning while the planning grant is going on? It's not yet complete, knowing that we'll have the action plan complete and then we'll need to do design and further planning, or do we need to wait until the first piece is done?
You can apply for supplemental.
But not demonstration?
And demonstration. You can apply for a supplemental demonstration.
Okay.
I would try to be organized about it. Like, what are you learning during your action plan process that would cause you to want to supplement what you're doing?
Right. So making the case.
Yeah, make the case for it, but also look for the higher jurisdiction action plan. Because if you have, like, a really good scenario is that your higher jurisdiction does have a roadway safety action plan, and also you're doing your own community one, and also you're finding things that you need to supplement.
I just want to thank everyone so much for these questions. It's really great when I'm not making them all up myself, and we're being responsive to you all. So please keep them coming. What we're going to do, though, is before, just in case anyone does need to start dropping, we're going to launch a poll, because what we're going to ask you in it is like, what else do you need to make sure that you're submitting a competitive application by June 26th? And so I don't want to lose anyone before we do that. So please do take a moment while we're still talking to fill out the poll and let us know what would be helpful to you, because we're here to offer support. And I think one area that we haven't, fully explored, we have other places where we've done that, and we'll share out the materials, is we have heard this administration talk a lot about prioritizing innovative technology. And what are those, right? Like, how do you actually use innovative technology to make your streets safer? We've done some deep dives. We'll put some links in the chat. But if that's an area where you all need some support, we have some experts who we can pull in and give you more, tailored information there. But please do take a moment to fill that out, and we'll keep going. Caroline, Swinford asked, can you clarify if DOT is looking for the birth rate, number of births per 1,000 individuals, or the fertility rate, number of births per 1,000 women, or reproductive age? I don't know that we know that. Justin, let me toss to you.
I have seen both terms be used.
Yeah.
The one that makes sense to me in the way the census reports it, similarly to the marriage rate, is the fertility rate, which is what we've done. I think I might have called it the birth rate in the slides. We're looking at the number of births per 1,000 women aged 15 to 50. It's the way that it's reported nationally. I would start there in the absence, again, of anything absolutely specific in the criteria. And I don't see it in the criteria.
Right.
Spelled
So,
out.
right. The NOFO does not specifically call for this, but references by
Right.
incorporation the
Yeah.
DOT memo that we've linked a couple of times. And so, like, it is a little bit hard to know exactly what you should be including there, because there is a little bit of lack of specificity. But as Justin said, I think, big reading between maybe the lines and trying to figure out which of those is the way to talk about the project. Okay. Please apologize if I script the pronunciation here, but Adrena Aguilar has asked if our local school district has a Safe Streets for Students pilot program, which identified issues and made recommendations. Can we as a city use the school district's plan for a demonstration project?
Good
Anyone?
question. Is there any action plan process that you can point to? That's the question that I would ask. I'm not sure this is like a hard no, but I think it's a little shaky. Maybe if nobody's done any sort of comprehensive action plan, or there isn't even one underway. So check to see
And
if it's
Adrena, I
higher
would maybe welcome you.
jurisdiction.
Yeah. Adrena, if you want to come off mute and add anything.
Oh
feel
yeah,
free.
okay, one is underway. So you can point to this process. And yeah, I would say this could be a good thing. You have one underway. In this process, you have discovered a new opportunity for partnership with the school district, who has a Safe Streets for Students pilot. And now you want to do some demonstration associated with your action plan that will inform your action plan in conjunction with the school district. I think that could be interesting.
Great. Anyone have any other questions for the team of experts here? Thank you, by the way, Robin, Emily, and Justin. This has been really incredible. Emily, I have a question for you. We have gotten some questions. I think you've been doing such a great job of answering them in the chat, but I do want to elevate. We hear matching funds is just like the hardest part for cities often of putting together an application. Can you give cities any guidance on how to think creatively about the matching funds, and any tea leaves you can read about how this administration is thinking about those?
I don't have any tea leaves, but Robin might. Some of my general advice is, I mean, you can combine in kind with cash from your own budget, or if you are working with your state, that's a really great way. Some people have private partnerships. If there's for example, one of my clients there is a huge employer in a small town, and they have a vested interest in keeping the road particularly, right by where they are located. So they provided a match. There, a lot of towns do provide at least a partial in-kind, because you do know you'll spend some staff time on the grant administration, and that's totally allowable. I mean, you can do a fully in-kind if it's a small enough amount. You can also count some of your contractor hours toward a match. So there's several ways to approach it. I don't know if there's a certain way that this administration is looking at that. Robin?
I was going to go in a slightly different direction and
Okay.
say that you should all be asking your states to pay your match. They might say no, but there have been instances where states have said yes. And when I can just tell you from experience, when the first one of those came through, which was the state of Iowa paying the match for 3 different Iowa cities, it was awesome. It was like home run kind of stuff. So I would ask your states, I would just approach your states and ask for them to pay your match. It's the ultimate in partnership.
Some states have
Yeah.
institutions set up to help precisely with this.
Yeah.
We've also seen some communities use leftover CDBG funds
Mm-hmm.
that are allowed to be, they have been allowed to be used as local match as well.
That's great. Thank you so much. And Susan sort of anticipated, I guess, where Robin was going and asking about applying to the state for matching funds, if that's going to count as collaboration on the project.
I'd be a little careful not to indicate, write anything that indicates that your match is shaky. So I would just say, you've got the match. You have your match, period. And don't be specific, but then get a letter of support from the state.
Yeah. And maybe, I'm going to speak as a PTA president for Focus on Families. It wouldn't probably hurt to get your PTA to write a letter in support of the project. So thank you so much, Robin, Emily, and Justin. We're going to conclude the discussion so that we can just, we're going to share some resources in the chat. We've been busy at work with this fantastic group, and as we talked about before in our earlier webinar, trying to get you the latest intel and advice. And so please do check out, this was a consolidation of multiple hours of support that Robin and Emily and Justin have been providing in our boot camps. And we have deeper resources available on our website, and we'll post that in the chat. Just also wanted to remind folks that this is Infrastructure Week, and our partners at United for Infrastructure have been highlighting ways that cities are building stronger infrastructure, and how that creates a more robust presence around the country. And so I would point you to unitedforinfrastructure.org, and I know that there were lots of conversations today in Washington about continued funding for this work, which we know is so important to communities. We all want safer roads, and so I think that's an area of common ground we can always find. And just want to thank all of our partners today for joining us, and please do continue checking out the local infrastructure hub calendar. It's updated regularly as any NOFOs drop. We're going to quickly work with our experts to make sure that you are getting the latest intel and early advice to be able to submit competitive applications. So I just put the calendar in the chat. I also want to congratulate, I don't know if people were paying attention, but last week, USDOT announced 180 projects that are moving forward that have previously been awarded funding. Many of those projects were for cities that had worked with us through the local infrastructure hub to get funding. So congratulations to those communities, and we'll keep working with you. Let us know how to make sure that your program gets funding. If it was awarded funding, we want to work with you on how do you make sure that project scope and budget and everything is in alignment with this administration's priorities so that it advances. So thank you all. Hope that you have a wonderful day, and happy Infrastructure Week. Bye-bye.